changes now, though.
Yeah, it works.
There's a case here.
All right, well, let's
Try to do everything.
let's get rolling, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to call to order our council workshop for Monday, March 13th at 5 o'clock. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Will someone move adoption of the agenda? By Councillors Moss, second by Councillor Back. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. We have a few sets of minutes that have been circulated from March 13th and the January 30th meeting. Any errors or omissions from those meeting minutes as presented? Will somebody please move adoption? Councillor Forbes, Councillor Ma. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries.
I want to put my hand up for that first one.
I know, so get you on the list there somewhere. Okay, so we all know where we're at. We've had our public discussion on the March 6th meeting for the budget process. We've obviously had a few variables in the calculus change a smidge over the last little bit with the contribution of $10.2 million from the provincial government, and also with the staff hearing the information coming from the public discussion and also council questions and such since that time. And so Rick's going to start us off here tonight and talk about what staff have come up with to sort of accommodate some of those changes as well. And then we'll have our deliberations tonight. We have a bit of a time limit in that we have a regular meeting of council scheduled for 7 o'clock. We have to start that at 7 o'clock. If we don't finish the council workshop before 7 o'clock, then we need to resume it after the regular meeting of the council. Now, I don't expect it to be a full-length regular meeting of council, but if we can conclude beforehand, great, fantastic. To aid us in that regard, unlike a normal workshop, I will put up the time limits for council members to discuss items, and that should give everybody a few opportunities to contribute to the workshop before we wrap up the matter. And then, of course, the items from tonight's discussion will return to the March 27th regular meeting of council for the final for a decision. That officially is an agreement in principle on the budget, I believe, or a provisional budget, and then the final budget comes in officially about a month later when you have all of the roll information and everything. Is that correct?
No, Your Worship, we're now recommending that it be first 3 readings on the 27th.
There you go. Okay, so then, so the final decision being that. And then obviously the last most important step from that it would be tax distribution discussions following that, which I think is, what date is that currently scheduled for then, Rick?
Monday, April 17th.
Okay, well, so at this point, I'm going to turn the matter over to Rick for his introductory comments, and there you go, all yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, members of council and public listening in tonight. I'd like to start by thanking the public for their input during this budget process, and thank our communications team for their support in getting the word out about the opportunity. There's lots going on out there in the world, lots of uncertainty, and people have different feelings than they might have during other budget processes. So we were happy to hear more from the community this year. I have Peter Cohen here with me tonight, our Deputy General Manager of Engineering, to present the proposed changes to the capital plan a little bit later on. So he'll get into some of the details about the changes that are being proposed. But before we go there, I'd like to recap where we're at, provide a brief update on the public input that was received, and present a summary of the proposed changes and new budget assumptions. The draft 2023 budget was introduced February 13th and was centered around 3 main themes: being prudent in this challenging fiscal environment, continuing to advance critical community priorities, and adapting to new information as it comes available. As we heard a little earlier from the mayor, we an announcement on municipal grants in the province. And along with that, the public input has been higher than usual. So we have new information this process. Staff had looked at that new information and have developed a strategy to advance additional priorities considering that new information. The proposed changes do require new staff capacity, partnerships, increased borrowing, and other elements over the next 5 years to succeed. The plan also includes additional resources to address risks that have increased since the plan was introduced. Staff are excited about moving forward with the budget and are recommending the financial plan bylaw be brought back for approval on March 27th. As we've mentioned in the past, the budget can be amended anytime, and we're already into the third month of the year and critical work must proceed. So with that in mind, staff are recommending approval of the budget, including the changes proposed tonight, and then coming back with amendments to the budget later this year. As the fiscal environment is expected to continue to change, the amendment process will help us keep current with information and stay aligned with council strategic planning and future directions from council in workshops that we expect to see happening throughout the year. This year, we did see record public input into the budget. The communications team worked with finance to come up with a communications and engagement plan. It included print and digital ads, a targeted social media campaign, a brief video to explain the budget process. There were message boards throughout the municipality, and a detailed budget webpage, amongst other initiatives to get the word out about the opportunity to participate. It's my feeling that the district has done a fairly good job organizing their plans over the years and establishing a clear long-term vision. And that's critical to getting the public out to collaborate on priorities. We heard last Monday how important the OCP is to the community, and in the near term, how important community health and mobility are. In particular, we heard about increasing investments in fields and moving forward with active transportation plans. Public input included 22 themes overall, with the top 5 also including desire for a higher tax increase, typically coupled with support to advance the OCP, followed by climate and the environment and affordable housing. Communications and finance will continue to work on ideas to broaden community participation, and we'll be exploring new initiatives to achieve this outcome in advance of the next budget process. After receiving the new provincial funding through the Growing Communities Fund and listening to the public, staff are recommending additional fields in Spirit Trail to Deep Cove be included in this budget. In doing this, the capital plan will be increased by about 8% per year and will leverage ongoing funding already in place to borrow an additional $15.6 million. After implementing these projects, property taxes will need to increase. This will happen in the outer years as the projects complete, and the increases are expected to be in the range of about 0.5 point per year in the outer years of the plan. The total ongoing increase at the end of the 5 years would be in the range of 2 to 3%. For this year, staff are proposing a property tax increase of 5.25% to mitigate increasing risks, including ongoing and higher construction prices, unsettled labor contracts, and these additional projects, which are now recommended to be included in the plan. This list of assumptions is provided to help create a better understanding of the impacts from the new projects. The new ATF fields will significantly improve the number and quality of fields available for play, especially during the winter season. The recreation needs assessment which is happening later on this year and into 2024, will confirm the total number of new fields required. And so this plan is for up to 6 new fields. We'll see what happens through the needs assessment. An agreement with the school district is also required, and that's for the secondary school field at Handsworth. In terms of assumptions for the Spirit Trail, a route needs to be chosen before with detailed planning and securing funding from our partners. In scanning the projects that have completed over the years, which are similar, external partner contributions have been in the range of 50%. So it's not unreasonable what staff are including in this plan you see tonight. There is an opportunity from the province for the new active transportation plan this September. That's when the first intake from the new $100 million active transportation grant program from the province begins. So it'll be important to have some good planning information together if we're going to proceed with submitting an application through that program. So with these assumptions in mind, delivering on these two projects is not guaranteed, but the projects do have a relatively high probability of success. And I'll pass this presentation over to Peter now. He's going to walk you through details about the project's timing, other elements.
Thanks, Rick. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So over the next 4 slides, I'm going to walk you through what we've heard from the community and what we've made some changes in terms of our capital plan over the next 5 years. From what we heard from the community, there's really 2 key themes. Rick shared with you a broad spectrum in terms of what we've heard, but for what we took away from the public feedback, there were really 2 key areas where the vast majority of comments were related to. Firstly, the community wants to see more artificial turf fields, or ATFs, and then being constructed sooner. And secondly, the community wanted to see the construction start on the Spirit Trail for that extension out to Deep Cove. I'll now walk you through how we took the specific feedback and we're able to make some changes to the 5-year plan and construction funding to now be included. In thinking about how we could bring additional initiatives back into the plan, but also being mindful of our financial and resource constraints, we needed to be creative about how we would approach and scope these additional projects. For ATFs, we heard from the community that getting more playable spaces constructed, and specifically for kids to use sooner, was important. To maximize the amount of playable spaces we could deliver in the 5-year plan, we prioritized including construction funds only for the playable surface itself, plus also ensuring that lighting was available to maximize hours of play. All additional enhancements are proposed to be delivered in future phases. So to walk you through what this actually means, if we think about Handsworth, we've identified construction funds for an ATF surface, as well as lighting, but the sports track would be delivered in a future phase. At Inter River, we've similarly identified construction funds for the ATF surface and lighting, but all other tournament facility enhancements like a new washroom and a large paved car parking area are all being proposed to be delivered in a future phase as well. Our 5-year plan also sets aside funding to convert up to 3 existing fields with an ATF surface. Those exact fields are to be confirmed, but many existing locations already include lighting. And also just to remind Council, bringing in these new ATF playing surfaces into the plan is in addition to the projects that we've already got on the books for Argyle, Griffin and Windsor, which are already being progressed and were already assumed to be as part of the 5-year plan. The next slide will visualize what our overall program looks like. For the Spirit Trail, we've identified a strategy that brings construction funds for an initial permanent link from Maplewood to Deep Cove into the 5-year plan. Over the past few weeks, we have heard from the community that this connection to Deep Cove should be a top priority. In order to progress an initial link to Deep Cove, we will need to rely on external funding partners, as Rick alluded to just before. In looking at other examples across the North Shore where the Spirit Trail has been built, we believe that assuming at least 50% of the funding to be via grants and contributions from others, and that is quite reasonable. Please note that what we include within the 2023 to 2027 plan covers roughly half of the total Spirit Trail scope that we're envisioning east of Highway 1. And for the final alignment we want to deliver to Deep Cove for the next 5 years, this will be subject to consideration and approvals from both this council as well as TWA, as part of those alignments are on the plans. And lastly, as part of our strategy, we also propose slowing down further development at Sealand Park while we focus our attention to realising and delivering the ATF surface at Inter River. So while our focus over the last few minutes has been about bringing more projects into the plan, I think it's also important to share with Council a high-level overview of the fields and active transportation program over the next 5 years. This slide here provides you with an overview of our proposed ATF work plan from 2023 through to 2027. Over the 5 years, it comes to approximately $33 million. And this image gives you a rough indication of how we plan to progress this work. What you see there with a blue cell with a D indicates a design year, and what's there in a green with a C is a construction year. The top 3 rows, Argyle, William Griffin, and Windsor, have always been proposed in the capital plan and remain unchanged. These 3 projects are now supplemented with design and construction funds for up to 5 additional ATF surfaces within the district, again at Handsworth, at Inter River, and by converting up to 3 existing fields as well. In the years ahead, as you can see, we will be spending up to roughly $10 million per year to progress this program of delivering new ATFs for our community. One point of clarification on the slide is on the new Handsworth ATF. We include construction funds for the ATF surface and the new lighting within the plan, but the timing for when this might be done is subject to some further discussions with the school district to identify when would be the best time for us to upgrade their current plans for a grass field into an ATF. My final slide here before handing back to Rick is a similar overview, but it's for our 5-year active transportation program. On the bottom row here, you will now see that we have a new inclusion, and that's for the initial phase for the Spirit Trail extension to Deep Cove. Over the next 5 years, with the inclusion of the Spirit Trail construction, we are now proposing to deliver approximately $34 million of pedestrian and cycling projects, with a peak in spending in 2025, with approximately $14 million of projects being delivered in those 12 months. All sidewalk projects are relatively unchanged from our previously proposed plans. For our cycling projects, we know that council has an interest in further discussing in 2023 to inform our investment priorities in the years ahead. To ensure we do have shovel-ready projects in the future, you will see that many of our cycling projects continue to be planned and designed across this year and next year. And then in 2025, we have an allocation of $4.5 million for construction of whatever those priorities that council defines for us. Over the last few slides have been able to show with you what we heard from the public about our proposed budget and the proposed changes that we've made. I'm now going to hand back to Rick to walk you through how we plan to fund these.
Thanks, Peter. Just briefly, funding for these projects will come from borrowing, the Growing Communities Fund, developer contributions, and partnerships. To secure additional borrowing, staff recommend leveraging the ongoing revenue from tax growth that has been set aside in the past for active transportation projects. So there's a few $1 million set aside for that. One additional $1 million for leverage up to $12 million in borrowing. So that's what we're doing here. We're leveraging this ongoing revenue that's already been set aside for active transportation to fund the borrowing portion of these projects.
Where does that show up there?
On the left pie chart there, you see borrowing 8.6, and on the right, you see borrowing 7. So there's 15.6 total. And what we're doing is we're leveraging ongoing revenue that's been set aside in the past to service the borrowing costs. The next biggest funding source there is the Growing Communities Fund, where we've got 10.3 million. Sorry, not the next biggest one. The next biggest under the district's control is the Growing Community Fund, where we received $10.2 million back in March 3rd. Staff are recommending a $5 million allocation to the sports fields and a $3 million allocation to the Spirit Trail extension. That leaves just over $2 million for other priorities later on, possibly through the amendments to be allocated. There was an interest expressed in developer contributions as well, so staff had reached out to the province and got in touch with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and reviewed sports fields in particular, and are recommending an adjustment from developer contributions to sports fields up to $4.5 million. And you won't see anything in the Spirit Trail extension at this point. It's not in the DCC bylaw. But when we review the DCC program or development program and bring that back later in the second quarter, we'll update assumptions there and recommend including that project in the plan. So for now, it's not showing any contribution from development. In terms of our partners, staff have worked with the field users on a funding strategy before the onset of COVID, and those conversations were stalled and have resumed recently. And as you heard last Monday, a contribution in the range of $2 million from the sports groups towards new playing surfaces is anticipated. And we're also reviewing user fees with the groups to align them with the district's financial planning principles, which will help reduce the impacts on other ratepayers as the sports fields complete. As Peter mentioned, we will be seeking partnerships on the Spirit Trail, and that 50% funding from external partners, or $10 million, is reasonable considering all the other agreements that have been reached on similar projects in the Lower Mainland. That brings us to the final slide, which is the draft recommendation, which in total adds $40.6 million to the financial plan for these projects. including future impacts on the tax levy and a proposed property tax increase, 5.25% for this year. That concludes the presentation from Peter and I, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Very much. I have a couple of questions. How much long-term borrowing does the district currently have?
I can't give you the total amount outstanding, but the amount of services is about 2.4% of the tax revenue, if that's helpful, because that's how we measure.
$40 million or what's the, sorry,
It's less than that. It's about
less than that? 30 million?
It's different. I'll find it right now.
Yeah.
So this would be going up by about 50% increase in the borrowing, the amount of money that we have in our long-term capital plan for borrowing.
This is an extra 15.66 million. We have 50 million already in the drop plan for Maplewood Fire Rescue Center and others. So this will bring us to a total of $65 million in borrowing. The measure is what percentage of your ongoing tax revenue are your debt servicing costs, and this district would be under 7%. It's 6.4% by 2027. Currently, we're 2.4%.
What's the current MFA rate for borrowing?
So the forecasting right now is that when we need it, we'll be in the range of 4.75%, so a little bit higher than it is right now.
Your worship, total debt currently outstanding at the end of the last audit is 30,500,000.
And that'll go up to 65-ish with the fire training center and all of these projects.
The new borrowing is 65.
Oh,
And
so
so
it
the
brings it
total
up
is
to
95.
There you go. So it brings it to 95 that we have to
Some coming off as we go.
a couple speakers first, sorry. Okay, so so the total borrowing when we get to 5 years into this plan will be about $95 million borrowing, is that correct?
I'd have to check on what the total is. Yeah, but as a percentage of ongoing tax revenue, it'll be 6.4%.
Right.
That's helpful. Because it's a measure of affordability and how much more borrowing room or flexibility you might have. A good benchmark might be in the range of 8.
Yeah, I get that. If I recall correctly, I think our assent-free borrowing cap is somewhere around $250 million for the district, anything. So we're nowhere near that. We don't have to go get special permission from the province. We're well within what's allowed for a municipality of our size with our resources. And sorry, the borrowing rate you say is expected to be about 4.75
Yeah.
at the time we need the borrowing for the fields and projects. What rate did we get for the Maplewood Fire Training Center? Is that already locked up, or is that also going to be a floating rate?
So in the future, and so right now, I'm working with the MFA. We're expecting 4.75% for the first issue in 2024.
Right. I've got Councillor Mauve, Councillor Pope, Councillor Mauve.
I've reviewed a few DMV budgets during my time at NBCAN. This is my first budget as a councillor, and it is a complex process. At the same time, I'm encouraged by the degree of input engagement from the public. It's a good sign given the voter turnout from the last election. And sitting on this side of the table, I recognize the tremendous amount of work done by the staff and my fellow council members in trying to, put in development of the budget and the revision of the budget. So having said that, I do want to jump in a couple of questions. I know we had a quick discussion about the funding, so I'm going to leave that for now. Just want to jump into the artificial turf. If you can help me to understand the terminology, total ongoing increase of 2 to 3%, and then there's also another future property tax increase of about 1% to maintain and operate the Spirit Trail. Given that the district has traditionally had tax increases of about 3%, does that mean going forward, our tax increases are going to be more in the range of 5 to 6%?
No, as the project's complete, I expect an extra half point per year. So we're expecting inflation to come down to about 2%. We're recommending continuing with the 1% policy, so it's 2 and 1. And then these projects will add an extra half point, so 3.5%.
Okay. And in the January draft, the cost of a gravel field conversion for both Kilmer and Myrtle was budgeted about 3.3. And in tonight's presentation, I think each of the conversions are 3 million each. Can you help explain that difference?
Yeah, so through the mayor, in terms of those, we've had some extra time to look at, it's still very early days of looking through all the different initiatives and priorities. This is a 5-year plan, and some of the projects within that, they're still very early in their planning cycle. We've been able to work further with the team just to identify, what does that look like? For the field conversions, just to clarify, we're just assigning $3 million for 3 fields. Historically, we've looked at Myrtle, Delbrook, and Kilmer as part of the
3
program.
each.
3 each, that's correct. So just for clarity, 3 million for a conversion, at 5 to 7 for a net new, and then Inter-River, because it's a complex site, is close to 10. That's kind of what we did up in terms of that piece. But through that exercise, the field of conversion and from council feedback in future sessions, it's up to 3, and it could be any. So we just want to spend some time figuring out what's the best locations.
I have a few more, but I'll wait.
Yeah, no, but just with that, some of them will include washrooms and parking upgrades and non-field assets as well, but so that's what'll feed into that. Councillor Pope, followed by Councillor Back. Councillor Pope.
First of all, I would like to acknowledge our MLA in the room, Susie Chant. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Welcome to listen in.
Thank you very much for the recent gift from the provincial government for the Growing Communities Fund.
My pleasure, of course.
I'm glad to see that this new budget has funding allocated for the priorities of the community, namely active transport, bike lanes, and the Spirit Trail. I'm pleased to see the funding for the artificial turfs. All of these were dropped and chopped from the earlier draft budget. Again, I want to thank the provincial NDP government, MLA, Susie Chant, and Bowen Ma for providing the $10 million grant. Because the bike path, the Spirit Trail, the turf fields, none of this would have happened without this grant. So the Spirit Trail, my question regarding the Spirit Trail, and I have a fair number of other questions as well, is that it's great that there's to see that there is some funding in there, but here's the problem. The other separated bike lanes, for example, between Lynn Valley and Lynn Creek and Main Street to the bridge, and a half dozen others are all being deferred or are in the design stage. And yes, we want the Spirit Trail, but not at the expense of these other important bike infrastructure projects that links communities, gets people out of their cars, reduces congestion, and creates a healthier, happier community, which was outlined in detail in the official community plan and the official community plan's active update. What was it?
Action plan.
Action plan. Thank you. But the number one reason we need the bike infrastructure and we need it to happen right away is safety. And of course, there was this horrible, tragic situation last week with the woman on her bike who was mowed down by a truck. And that was just a few blocks from here. Bike infrastructure saves lives and prevents injuries. And with more and more people cycling and e-bikes, we must make safety a priority in this budget. And that means shovels in the ground for those projects that were previously deferred and somehow haven't shown up here. That needs to happen this year. I do not want to see this money from the province be spent on more delays while more design work is complete. We must get moving on these projects, some of them, the important ones, this year. And additionally, I totally support the e-bike incentive program, which was also chopped. That should definitely stay in. We're trying to encourage more people to bike, and I was so happy to hear from the elderly people. Well, actually, they're about my age, the seniors, the seniors who were there saying that riding these e-bikes has changed their lives. It's changed their lives. And they told us that they're outside more and they're using their cars less and they're feeling more connected to their communities. All of these things, and these are the reasons why I think that we need to include these bike projects and bike paths and active transportation in this budget. And so why is it that we haven't included those?
Through your worship, there was $4.5 million that was added to the draft financial plan as Peter goes through his updates to transportation plans. So we can look at that $4.5 million for these priorities.
What I'm seeing is that all of these cycling projects have got the big D, which to me means deferred, but actually technically, I think it means design. But the bottom line with it is that it's deferred. There isn't one construction bit on there until 2025 for Capilano Ridgewood. Yes.
The second row there at the bottom, that 4.5 is for construction. Sorry, Peter.
No worries. So through the mayor, so in terms of how we've approached the plan here, 2023 and portions of 2024 were already planned to be design and planning years already. These projects take a couple, 2 to 3 years to get shovel ready because of planning and design, and particularly engagement and council endorsement of what we're trying to proceed with. So that's why you'll see a lot of the Ds in 2023 that does stand for design. The second bottom line here, which is this particular line here, all these projects that don't have construction funding, all of these could potentially feed into this line in terms of the construction funding that's available in 2025, 2026, and 2027. We just need to get just to reconnect with council, just to reconfirm that where we want to prioritize our investment is in line with this council's direction. And from the feedback that we've received over the last several months, we know that across this year there wants to be a workshop and a discussion in terms of reconfirming our priorities on those fronts.
Mr. Joyce has additional comments.
I'll let Peter finish this one and I'll respond to any question.
I was about to, so I'll hand it to Gavin.
Through your worship, so the e-bike program was with 3 North Shore municipalities. It was a joint program. One of the first things West Van Council did was back out of the program.
Yeah.
So we're now retooling with the 2 North Shore, city and the district, to see that one out. We're prepared to go forward with it, but one of our partners has dropped out.
Okay, well, we need to figure out a different way, right? Just
Something to go forward this year with the program, and that's what we're working on.
if I could just pick up on what you were saying there, that still sounds like a deferral to me. I'm really having trouble understanding why we can't build these bike lanes sooner. It seems bad. Why do we need 2 to 3 years to construct a bike lane that's in a small section of road?
Yeah, so through the mayor, just at a high level, it takes us about a year to plan and design through the technical work. It takes us roughly a year to go through the engagement and council endorsement process. So until we revisit what that process looks like, that's just the nature of how.
Hasn't council and the community already endorsed this many times in many ways through the public engagement process of the official community plan, the 2021 action plan, the recent public hearings where we heard over and over again that this is what people want, the hundreds and hundreds of letters we've all received on council from people wanting bike paths? Isn't that enough confirmation? Why do we need to come back to council to have more confirmation?
I think I think what you're saying is just that once it's designed, you still go back and consult, because we haven't actually talked to the community about the specific routes and the impacts in those areas. But I did just want to point out, we probably should have had the volume nice and really loud on it. We're already over 4 minutes on this. You'll get another opportunity to speak, but is that?
I would just like to see more urgency on the construction of the active transport.
Thank you. I've got councillors Back and Hanson. Councillor Back, your comments.
Thank you. I'll start as I always do. Thank you to staff for your work. I recognize that especially when we see this sort of huge amount of public input that we saw to the draft budget, that also equates to a significant amount of work for you and your team. So thank you very much for coming back to us with what I think is definitely an improvement over the draft budget. When I first saw the draft budget, my thoughts were around the official community plan, the OCP. I didn't see how the draft budget was connected to the OCP at all. I really saw it as a budget that was about keeping property tax increases low, among the lowest in the region, which has traditionally been our approach, conservative, and which ultimately is kind of the status quo. I think when we look at the fact that the OCP goes till 2030, we're in 2023 now, that's only 7 years away. And we're nowhere close to hitting our targets, whether it's lowering our emissions, whether it's transportation mode shifts or housing targets. And so I felt disheartened to see that first draft budget that really did not address any of those things in any meaningful way. So I guess it kind of leads me to my next point, which maybe this isn't the appropriate workshop to be having a deep dive into, what our commitment to the OCP is, but I think we all do need to ask ourselves around the table how committed we are to the implementation of our OCP. As we know, as Catherine's pointed out, it goes back to 2011 and over 2 years of engagement when the OCP was initially approved, and then over 2 years last term where we spent over $500,000 reviewing it. And coming up with an action plan that very much is aligned with everything that people were asking for when they came to speak at public input over the last week, over the last couple of weeks when we were hearing from the community. Everything that they were asking for was aligned with our OCP. And so if we were really committed, in my opinion, to implementing the OCP, these things would just be happening, and with a much greater sense of urgency, to Councillor Forbes' point. So as I say, I think we need to look in the mirror and say, is the OCP our guide? And if it isn't, if we don't believe it, and if we hear, as I've heard around this table before, it can be, it's a flexible document that can be changed, then I would question why we spent the amount of effort that we did in reviewing it. So just
Sorry, the ding dong was for 2 minutes.
just getting going.
It's supposed to be on 4 minutes, so you still have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
You could slow down.
But I'll just comment on some specifics. In terms of the active transportation, there was a lot of focus on the Spirit Trail in the public input, which I think is great. But if it's going to be at the expense of what I think are some more key connections, like the ones between town centers, I have a hard time, supporting all of that. I think that we need to look at the whole approach to active transportation, as you've highlighted, and I appreciate that we're going to be doing that. But the problem is, as we've seen before, we have bike facilities like 29th Street, for example, that don't connect to anything. And until we start to build out the network, then we're not going to see the mode shift that we need to see. Well, at least if we are committed to our targets, which are in our official community plan. So I'd like to see some of those projects, again, just as Councillor Popus said, a greater sense of urgency placed on all of those active transportation projects, which combined are not a huge investment compared to some of the other line items that we're seeing in the budget. And thank you for mentioning the e-bike incentive program that I brought forward last term. E-bikes are an absolutely game changer in terms of how they can take cars off the road and get people traveling via active transportation. So I'd like to see the e-bike incentive program back in. If it means we're doing it on our own, I'd like to find a way to do that. Again, I think the whole budget for it was 200,000 or 150,000. Relatively small, again, when you look at the number of items there. So, and then finally, well, I've got more, but the deferral of Sealand Park Phase 2, that's an area of our community where we've seen more new residents move in than any other area of the community. And to take away the second phase of their key amenity there, I have a hard time kind of supporting that as well. We're finally starting to see some life and vibrancy in Lynn Creek. The businesses are starting to open up. We don't need another dead zone. Granted that there's an old facility there. There's childcare, as we just heard from someone today. So, but I'd like to see that Phase 2 move forward to some degree in the next 5 years. I think there's reason for that. So those are my initial comments. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I too would like to thank my MLA. She actually is my MLA, Susie Chant, and I'm betraying my political affiliation when I say how much I enjoyed being at the fundraiser. My spouse and I enjoyed being at your fundraiser yesterday. I thought that was a very good event. I hope there'll be many more of those. And thank you as well for the $10 million, as was previously mentioned by Councillor Pope. And I'd like to start by thanking everyone involved in the preparation. I know it was painstaking work to prepare this 2022, 2023, 2027 financial plan. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Peter. And obviously, thank you all the members of the public who weighed in. We had such extensive outreach and communication to us. I very much appreciate that. And I'd also like to specifically thank all the councillors at this table who worked so hard. I know in preparation for this meeting, you asked many questions, you raised many concerns, and those questions and concerns have been useful to me in forming my opinions with respect to the budget. My comments are that I will be supporting Plan B. I will be supporting the 5.25% tax increase, which I believe to be a reasonable and responsible balancing of the interests in this case. I note that that tax increase does not include a 1% in infrastructure, which has been jettisoned. So this is really a 3.25% increase compared to our usual, or over our usual 2% inflationary increase. I also note that the plan provides for an additional $15 million in borrowing, and I believe that is reasonable and will not impose an excessive burden on future taxpayers. The plan provides $20 million for the construction of the Spirit Trail, an additional $4.5 million to be allocated towards other transportation initiatives. I believe that to be a reasonable sum. Altogether, there's a $34 million investment in active transportation, which I believe to be a serious commitment by this body to active transportation. There's always the potential to do more, I understand, but I believe this to be a reasonable way of the need. And there's also $20 million allocated towards sports fields. The Handsworth ATF is dealt with, as are the two ATFs at Inter River. In total, there's 6 new ATFs brought on. This essentially implements the strategy endorsed by council in 2017. And I note that the $20 million in sports fields funding includes $2 million from sports groups. This is in that respect a collaborative plan. I believe that this plan responds to the specific community concerns that were brought up in public input. And while it is true that many district taxpayers can't afford to pay more, and I understand that that's part of the narrative here, we're a wealthy community, we can pay more, and we can use that money to address important issues. It's also true in my belief that property taxes can represent a significant burden to some members of our community. In my opinion, local government taxation is a blunt instrument. Those who are well off pay exactly the same amount for their homes as those of modest means. In this way, property taxes are in fact a regressive tax. Local government lacks the progressive forms of taxation available to senior governments with respect to matters like income tax, capital gains tax. And I believe we must be extremely careful as local government to set tax rates that are reasonable and not seek to avoid imposing undue burden on our taxpayers, some of whom are of more modest means. I say this especially in view of the metro levies that are tallied to be as close as 20% in some categories. These are going to be compounding levies, and we could see. Can I take another 2 minutes to finish it off? The compounding levies that will leave us witnessing metro levies probably doubling, if not in this council term soon thereafter. And those, of course, cannot be deferred. In supporting this level of increase of 5.25%, I'm assuming that in the years to come, increases will be more modest. I would not, for the record, support 5.25% tax increases on a compounded cumulative basis throughout my term. I am also assuming that we will be reinstating the 1% increase for infrastructure, which will avoid us falling into an infrastructure deficit. And I congratulate finance staff for ensuring that we're in a position, a sufficiently financially robust position, that we can, on an as-needed basis, forego that 1% increase for infrastructure. But on an ongoing basis, I hope that we will continue to adopt that policy. Finally, I'll just say that I recognize that this financial plan, like any other, represents a very challenging balancing act between competing interests. And I acknowledge that, and I congratulate those who have been involved in what I believe to be a very difficult proposal. But I believe this plan does strike the right balance, and I look forward to supporting it through finalization of its budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councilor Forbes.
Councillor Hanson took my seat. I think I agree with just about everything you said. So rather than do at the wheel here, I have just some questions and some clarification. I know we talk about 2 different routes, upper and lower for the Spirit Trail, and it only mentions 20 million. So is it the same cost roughly, are you estimating the same cost, whether it's an upper or lower route?
Yeah, so through the mayor, the total scope and vision for the Spirit Trail is almost like a loop from Highway 1 out to Deep Cove. One portion of the loop mimicking Dollarton, somewhere off Dollarton, the other portion mimicking something off the Parkway. That collectively is $40 million. We've run some initial estimates, and regardless of which alignment we choose in the months to come, it's roughly half to get to Deep Cove. So whichever route you look at, it's roughly half the cost. And then
So are we planning to do 2 routes, or are we only looking, we're only looking at 1 route right now?
yeah, correct. So there is discussion in terms of what we do progress with and what the final vision looks like. The
Okay.
work that we've done to date does have a couple of options to Deep Cove that would be constructed. Within the 5-year plan, we're proposing up 1.
Okay, great, thank you. And I know there was an MOU signed with NBFC in February last year. Was that to do with the $2 million that was mentioned at last week's meeting? Or was that just to do with the upgrade on gravel fields?
Your worship, that MOU is one and the same. So the figure that actually was signed was 1.5. I believe you heard from the soccer rep that they had 2.
Yeah, but it's only 1.5.
And yes, and through those discussions to put the MOU together, there was a strong preference to use that money to look at conversions for gravel fields. So that's reflected in the plan as well.
Okay. So it's not that we hadn't talked for many years.
The previous park manager did, and our new park manager, Stephanie, has been meeting with them very regularly in the last while.
Thank you. Are we likely to try and put the 1% asset management back in next year's budget? What do you foresee?
It's a 2-year delay. It will come back in effect.
Okay. Can you give any idea, because I've mentioned this before, that everybody thinks, oh, it's only, you know, some people said $2, it's not $2, but some people think it's just over $100 effect, but the compound effect of Metro and TransLink regional taxes are going to push the total, their tax bill up when they get it. They're going to be shocked, I think. So can you give us any idea of what Metro and TransLink might be? The regional taxes, what they might be, what percentage you're sort of expecting to hear from them?
The largest increase would have been through the utility rate setting. Can't remember what the total increase was, but they were into double digits in both water and sewer utilities over the 5 years. So.
Are we talking on the low side of double digits or the high side or middle?
I think it was 12%, but I can't,
Around
going back to the fall's presentation, Mr. Wardell.
Through your worship, we've been rate smoothing, averaging
I know.
5 to 6% since 2013 to mitigate that.
Yeah.
Those rate impacts, if I go from my memory of the utility reports that were presented to council in November, those rates could be in any given year as high as 20%. So they do change, primarily driven by the wastewater treatment plant.
Right. I know that. So you're saying that within this 5-year budget, we could be looking at.
I would say in the next couple of years, we will see utility rates start to rise. Keeping in mind, though, that we've mitigated that. I think Rick's report from November did indicate that we'd probably be looking at a 5% rate probably moving forward in the next 7 to 10 years.
Thank you.
The biggest problem with that Metro plan is they're working towards a 10-year plan. They're not there yet. So we're looking out 5 years and it's hard to predict.
Okay, thank you.
It's a different route for different services. So water's gone up quite dramatically. I think it went from 289 million in revenue to almost $500 million in revenue in a span of about 3 years in the plan. But also liquid waste has also gone up dramatically, but solid waste hasn't gone up dramatically. And so, you know, you'll have to do the math on it to figure out what the final number is for us, but with the smoothing, Andy's talking about it, certainly won't be at the 20% mark.
But it's still going to have a major impact when people see their property bill. Have we got the letter from the province yet that defines exactly what we can spend the 10.2 on?
I'm anticipating it to be very broad. You can read that in the letter and in the news release, but we haven't received the specifics yet.
But it wouldn't include anything, like I know one of the top priorities of the district too is affordable or sustainable. Affordable and supportive housing. It wouldn't include housing in it. Spending.
I believe it does, when I, remembering the news release, it does mention housing.
So we haven't
We
really,
have MLA Chant in the room. Do you recall the specifics on that, or is that just, we're just waiting for the letter to come out?
Sort of a relatively short answer.
Okay.
My understanding was that there are no real specifics coming down. The discussion at UNBC and previous discussions were basically saying councils know what their communities need. Councils have the ability to spend the money in an appropriate and effective fashion. And the government is basically saying it needs to come off our books by the 31st of March, go on your books, please use it wisely, and please just let us know what you're doing and maybe give us a nod for what you do. That's, I understand. I was one of the call out gang. I got to call out to a lot, not just our mayors, but to a lot of mayors across the country province who were not necessarily of the orange persuasion. And so I got to call a lot of people, and that was the messaging we were given, was just, it's there. Your councils know what they need. Please, use it. Do what you need to do with it, and hopefully someday we'll get to do it again. I mean, this has been a really weird year. May never happen again, but let's try.
weird years.
Weird years. Just put it down to weird years.
There's some accountability mechanism, isn't there, as well, that we have to demonstrate how it's spent and on what?
I'm gonna let somebody over there.
Through your worship, there's a reporting on mechanism very similar to the COVID grants that we received, where we have to report out as part of our audit financial statements. I would suspect that it would be not audited information, but just a method of communicating in a structured way.
Just to continue on, I can see that there's two other agreements we're gonna need. Handsworth, we're gonna need to have an agreement with the school board. So are we going to, a number that was quoted, and I don't know, it was said last week was 300,000 the school board was putting aside? Is that correct?
I was told 300, but I think someone else had also heard 200,000, but that's the ballpark for the contribution to put grass on top.
So does anyone see any problem with them then saying they'll agree to turn that funding over to get the ATF?
I think part of the discussion is whether if it's going to take 2 years to do it, the question will be how much are they going to have to put in to use the field for 2 years in the interim time. But Alan, do you have a response?
Better answered by Peter, the timing of the grass. And
No worries.
Yeah.
So through the mayor, so in terms of the budget, we've just allocated just construction funds, but that is kind of subject to the agreements we need to have with the school district. We know the school district has an intent of installing a grass field there. We need to understand, can we leverage that opportunity to not put grass in and put an ATF there from day one, or if timing or agreements just aren't going to work out for that timeliness, just the grass go in and then a year or two later we come in and do the ATF. So there's still significantly more discussions we need to have with the school district to figure out what the right plan is. For the purpose of this budget, we just wanted to assign a number to ensure that it was on the books. This is what also wants to add to that as well.
Further, Peter, I think there's several items in this budget we'll need to come back to council with, and that's one. So we'll probably present our discussions with the school district, what the timing is, how we want to deal with it. As the mayor said, does the grass go in for 2 or 3 and comes out, or do we want to jump in there right now and look at potential for the officials? So there's some future decision points after our discussions with the school district. The budget reflects money to implement our mission.
And I guess I would just like to speak to the Kirkstone Park, before I get to the last point. Kirkstone Park had a 200,000 federal grant, did it not? When it got changed over?
the ATF?
Yeah.
Can't remember what the contributions are. What,
I'm pretty sure that I remember reading that when I walked past there and then.
Yeah, I can confirm.
Yes.
That was our first foray into converting those gravel fields. By everybody's account, soccer, council, community works quite well. But that was a pretty good one to do. It was flat, parking lot, easy access, got in, got out. It was
Right.
a big improvement. I think In that year, there was less than 300 hours of playing time on it. Success.
So is there any way we would have done the federal government for this type of funding that we got in?
Every, Sasha's here, every program that comes available, we make application.
Okay.
And I do want to correct that a little bit because we didn't get a chance to speak last week, Council. It was on the Spirit Trail, the new bridge that we've opened up. Spirit Trail. Half of that funding was for TransLink. So your staff does make application for all the grants on the Valley Bike Lane. And $2.5 million came from TransLink to put that bridge in. So
I didn't mean to imply you don't.
no, we heard from the public that we didn't have a grant, but we do. We actually we will go for every grant that we possibly can. So you do the facilities you do see built here in the district.
And the other agreement, which concerns me, because 9 or 10 years ago, when there was a discussion with the Tsleil-Waututh at that time didn't want to have the Spirit Trail go through their land. So we don't have an agreement with them right now either. So I certainly wouldn't want to start building and putting funds forward for something where we can't definitely know that we're going to have access to that. So has there been any more discussions recently with Tsleil-Waututh?
Yeah, so through the mayor, we work with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation on many transportation initiatives. So right now, if Spirit Trail, from what we've heard from the community, and if it was endorsed by council this budget, if Spirit Trail was to become a top priority for us to deliver, we would then start to progress those conversations in real earnest with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation staff. In terms of what we've looked at for the Spirit Trail alignments, some are located on TWN lands and some are not. And so based on the partnership that we have with TWN and how we progress that forward with council and TWN, those directions and decisions, we'll be able to come to a solution in terms of getting connection out to Deep Cove.
But we won't put money towards going past where we might do the upper route if the Tsleil-Waututh decides that they don't want it on their land below.
I can't speak on behalf of TWN in terms of their receptiveness, but what we can do as staff.
No, I mean, we won't spend our money developing past the point where we still have a choice. We're still waiting for an answer from them.
We can continue that dialogue with council once we get more of the details, but there are alignments that are on DNV only lands, and there are alignments that are on TWN lands.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And just want to say thank you to all staff. It's tough to do a budget, and it's really tough to do a budget older than now. So thank you.
Very much. I'm just going to make some comments, and then Councillor Ma, you indicated you wanted to speak again as well. I'm obviously, I've been an advocate for lower tax envelope for the district for a long time, trying to get us down to more competitive level. When I get that people will look at it as that we're comparing the increases, but the average taxpayer in the district of North Vancouver is already one of the top taxed groups within Metro Vancouver. And so it's not just about the increases, it's about what you're already paying as well in terms of taxation. Our mill rate has been going down. We have been competitive in the region for going back to 2004, but you know, that still is a challenge. The unintended consequence, I think, sometimes that we have to talk about, you know, with some of these tax increases. So what was the provincial increase in rental fees this year? 2.5.
Sorry, the increase in
Rental fees, so that a landlord can charge in terms of rents this year. 2.5, was it, or 2?
Yeah.
2 or 2.5?
I answered in the corner.
2%. Fantastic. Thank you.
I hope too.
Okay, so
Dan might have an update for us.
anyway, it's immaterial to what I was going to comment on. So we're going to come in at 5.25 now. It sounds like I've got 5.25 around the room. How does the difference get made up? Do I have a staff comment on how that difference gets made up to those landlords? Because what we're doing is we're taking all of the places that are providing rental, purpose-built rental in our community, and we're gutting their budget. We're making it so that the landlord has to make up more and more and more and more of the taxes, because we raise the taxes by 5.25. They're only able to claw back, through increases about 2%. And so while it may be good, it may give people some relief. It may keep monthly costs down for a great number of renters in the community. The knock-on effect is it makes it less and less and less competitive to be a landlord and to produce purpose-built rental and to try to get it in the marketplace. And you watch it diverge from market so rapidly when we come in at 5.25, but they're only able to go up 2%. And so you have to be aware of the unintended consequence there. The people who are providing purpose-built rentals in our community are going to have to make this up in their own budgets. They're going to have to do it by reducing services to their residents, or sometimes it'll be to profit to a private organization. Lots of them are nonprofits, so in most cases it'll actually be reductions in services to their tenants. So if we're too far out of line with what those provincial increases are going to be, we're taking the money out of those groups, many nonprofit groups. And so we have to be aware of that effect. I understand that people have the perception that we have a very wealthy community. The wealthy people won't have a problem with this increase. The wealthy people wouldn't have a problem with a higher increase, but the tax gets shared with everyone. I did just want to comment on the Spirit Trail question. $20 million, would you characterize that as a Class D estimate? Yeah, so Class D estimate is basically, we don't have a plan, we don't have a design, we don't have a contractor, we don't have anything to compare it to, and we've just come up with a general number of $20 million. The likelihood that project is going to be $20 million when it's completed. When you talk about potential for retaining walls being built to widen some of the areas, when you talk about having to potentially acquire private property in order to be able to widen the road, I'm a little incredulous that $20 million is going to be a fair number to even be putting in the budget. It's not only is it 2.5 kilometers across the TW land and lands if we end up south, but it would be probably 10 kilometers, I got to imagine, from the Seymour River, not from the Seymour River, but from where it currently ends all the way to Deep Cove. We have time still, Council, for another round. And so why don't we do another 4 minutes around if people want to add additional comments on it. Councillor Ma, your comments?
Thank you, Mayor Little. I think back when I ran for council, I was warned that I'm not going to be able to please everyone all the time. It seems like one of those situations. As mentioned earlier by Councillor Hansen, I recognize there's competing interests and trade-offs. The latest budget is definitely in the right direction as it pertains to community amenities like artificial turfs. I also feel that the turf fields will benefit more than the soccer clubs. We've heard a lot from soccer clubs, but I know there's other groups out there that I've talked to. It's going to help the field hockey clubs, the GSL football, the ultimate leagues, and baseball, also community groups. And in terms of Handsworth artificial turf, it's going to benefit the students. I think we shouldn't underestimate the benefit to the school and the students. I too would like to see more of a contribution towards active transportation, but committing to the Spirit Trail is probably a good first step. As a business grad, I do have some concerns about the amount of financing. And when I heard that it's 30 going to 95, that this is a very significant amount of borrowing. But I would trust the finance department to make sure that's covered. So on one hand, I'm concerned, but it seems like it's going to work, but there's going to be some pain for a couple of years. In terms of questions, there's been a lot of talk about, a sense of urgency, both in housing, both like a lot of our projects, from previous years. In terms of the artificial turf to conversion, I would just ask staff to see of the 3 fields, to see if, potentially one of them is a little more ready to go than some of the others. If we could get that online sooner, that would be one thing that I think would really benefit the community. And in terms of the Growing Communities grant for the district, I believe it's 10.25. And when I look at this budget, about 8 million's allocated. Is the other 2.5 somewhere, or is that being held as a reserve? Or is
Through your worship, the requirement is to set aside the funds in a specific reserve, so that's where those funds will stay until council gives us direction to allocate it.
So,
Put in your wishes now.
I know.
But you're anticipating,
Yeah.
What else can we put in?
you're anticipating a budget update in September and so.
If I can just ask a follow-up question. You know, we talk about a budget update in September. So what happens between now or I guess a couple of weeks when we give approval in principle in September? Is it the staff going away to, you know, get a more defined estimates, you know, or narrow down the numbers? I'm just trying to understand. I've been asked that question by a few members of the you know, public, like why, you know, put it back in the fall.
Through your worship, the spring and fall amendments traditionally are used as housekeeping amendments. So this, as we receive direction throughout the year, they're traditionally brought forward for council review and approval. In this case, we have a new council. There's council strategic planning in April. We have a full development program review coming at the end of Q2. We have another look at the long-term financial plan, or what we're referring to as a 10-year rolling financial plan. So those three things alone will lead to clearer direction and likely more significant amendments to the financial plan this fall.
But how we've used the fall update in the past, but if grants come in the interim time, if projects have overrun costs beyond what was anticipated, those kinds of things get updated in the fall update.
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Waddell.
Through your worship, staff regularly communicate with the council, and where appropriate, seek resolutions of council on specific events or activities or transactions that require amendment. And we gather that information and we bundle it into the fall amendment. So a lot of the work is done monthly throughout the year up until that accumulates in that amendment.
Sorry, I saw a hand over on this side. This was Councillor Pope. Councillor Pope, sorry.
So back to the ATFs, I'm again concerned about the timeline and the delays. As we heard from so many families at the public meetings, they need these amenities today. They're turning away 100 kids a year at the academy because they don't have the turf fields to play on. So when I think of the Inter-River Park, I think of that sign I saw, which was put up in 2022, November last year, that said construction will start next year. So why is it that now we're saying, oh no, we have to have more planning and design work, and construction isn't going to start maybe until 2024, sorry.
Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, so through the mayor, in terms of Inter-River, we're about 7 to 9 months behind the original schedule set several years ago. And in terms of that, we had to find sand for preloading, which took a long time. Plus, we also had COVID-related delays as well. So we're actually.
Sorry, can you slow down and speak up just a little bit?
No worries. So in terms of Inter-River, overall, we're about 7 to 9 months behind of what the original schedule was several years ago. Some of those delays are relating to procuring preload sand, and some of those delays are related just to COVID impacts. Where we are right now is we are wrapping up designs this summer. We will go out to tender this fall, and then the intent is to start construction in 2024. So
Why
that's.
did the sign go up last November? I don't. Saying that construction would start this year.
I can't answer that directly unless, Gavin, you have anything else to add?
Often on our capital projects, there's changes, and I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but there's often changes in the schedule as you go forward. That is a complex site because it is the old landfill area, it's a broad location. I can tell you in my career, we've never had a problem getting rid of material, sand, and that's become a problem. So you just mentioned these uncertain times. I mean, everything we seem to pick up on a weekly basis now is a challenge. So we used to be able to just move the site, somebody would come and take it, use it for projects. Dollarton Highway is the material we took out of the river, for example. But in this case, we're having a hard time finding takers for that material. But as Peter alluded to, we're about 7 months behind the original schedule. What is really challenging for us is capacity, and we talk about capacity, as you may have mentioned, at the staff level. There's capacity in the community. There's capacity to find consultants and people to take roles. And with respect, even the money that the province is putting forward is just more money into the entire system. That's not really what we need right now. We need more people. We need people and machines to dig and get out and do these projects. It's not so much the monetary side of it. So we're about half a year behind, but according to our schedule, Peter's team wraps up the design and then we'll be out to tender this fall.
Mr. Janela?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to add, obviously, we're not unique in the district with these issues. It's a common problem in the lower mainland and across the province and across the country and other places. So, to my mind, looking at how we kept pace, and there's been some good progress looking back over the last 3 years and the challenges that we've been facing.
Mr. Stewart?
Just to ask Gavin, how many companies are there out there that actually design and construct artificial turf fields?
A couple. Vinny's the one that's completely overwhelmed at this point, and that's kind of the Canadian economy. There's not a lot of folks in this. Routinely when we had projects for bridges a decade ago, you'd have 15 or 16 contractors. We're trying to find competitive bids now to bring people in to get 2 contractors to bid on it. So you've got work everywhere, and you've heard about the North Shore Premium. If you can find work in the valley or on the other side, that's where you're going to work. And so if you're going to come over here, you're going to pay more to come across the bridge and work. But to Mr. Stewart's point, there's just simply not enough people in the industry to do these projects.
My other question is about Hansworth. I can tell you that from informal discussions I've had, that they absolutely support an ATF. There's going to be no question about wanting to keep grass versus an ATF. And so I wouldn't expect that would take very long to confirm. That could be confirmed right away. And the second concern is nobody wants to see grass put in at a cost of $200,000 and then ripped up 2 years from now when it finally moves forward. So that again, sort of to me says we have to move forward more quickly with the Hansworth construction, because now we've got a situation where, for example, my daughter will be graduating from Hansworth next year, never having a track or a field at Hansworth the entire time she's been there. And she's not alone. There's years of kids who have been waiting for years to have a track or a field or something. So to delay it even further is just makes no sense to me, and I really do feel it should be prioritized. I also understand that the replacement turfs, the estimate there may be a bit high, given the Kirkstone only costs $850,000, and I understand there were differences, and there always will be differences with these fields, but can we go down the road of just looking at not necessarily building a tournament level field? I think you called it something, Herman, I love track 2 or something. It's tier 2 type of field. Can we do that if the sports groups are think that that would be okay, which they have told me informally they would be okay with that to reduce our costs. And I think basically that about wraps it up for me. So in summary, I really would like to see a slightly revised budget that gets shovels in the ground starting this year on Hansworth and Inter-River, and some of the critical bike paths that we need for safety and for connecting communities, including Spirit Trail.
Joyce, you had additional comments?
I do. To Councillor Pope, we can start Hansworth negotiations as soon as the budget's approved. We just can't progress until the agreements are in place with the school district. But should we proceed here, we'll reach out and start that discussion right away. The gravel conversions are smaller and lower in quality than the tournament standard, which is why they're cheaper and why we can get to them quicker.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes?
That was next, actually.
Oh, sorry.
I don't have a lot more to add, but I want to stress along with the lines of what Councillor Pope said around Handsworth, I'd like to see that move forward as quickly as possible. If it sounds like that's largely a staff to staff discussion that needs to take place. I know with Argyle, it took a long time, way too long to hammer out that user agreement. So I'm hoping that this is going to be exponentially faster. Do we have a meeting with the school board coming up? If we do, I'd like to get one set up that we can talk about some of these issues because there's other opportunities where we could be partnering, but I think Handsworth is one of the main ones right now that does need more of a sense of an urgent nature. And agree with Inter-River as well. I want to see that project move forward quicker. And I forgot where I was going with my next thought.
We don't have to wait to a council to council dinner to work with the school district. We can start that right away. Mr. Stewart had a comment.
Yeah, just saying, we have a standing staff to staff meeting, if not once every month, every second month. The last time we met was January, so we're due for another one.
Good. And hopefully we can learn from the experience of coming up with the Argyle agreement, because it was really unacceptable how long it took to come up. And I'm not blaming anybody, just saying that it's got to go faster than that. And my other point was with the Spirit Trail. I think this is a beautiful partnership opportunity with Tsleil-Waututh. I would love to see us sit down and talk about a number of things in terms of how we build our relationship and grow it council to council. But I think the Spirit Trail would be just such a great thing to be able to start some ongoing conversations with them. So I know we do have a dinner coming up with them, with their council, but I would love to really, talk about what it means to them and how we could include them in the most fulsome way possible. I know in speaking with some of the residents who are on reserve along Dollarton, that, on a personal level, they're interested in seeing some safety improvements, because that's not just a corridor where, they're walking through, that's their front, driveway, their front yard. So I know they're very open to improvements. So I think it would be a positive conversation, and I'd like to see us start that sooner rather than later. Because I just think it's a perfect opportunity to work together. So that's my only thoughts there. So largely I'm supportive of this. I don't think it goes quite far enough, as I said. I think the fact that we still have so many of these key active transportation projects, and some of them are some of the top ones. Like I know Lynn Valley to Lynn Creek was the #1 priority for Hub. And yet that's going to sit in the design phase, and maybe we'll see construction in the outer years of the 5-year plan. Maybe we won't, but I certainly hope that we do. And I'll say now that I hope that $2 million that's remaining from the growing communities is considered for active transportation, because $2 million does go quite a ways with some of these AT projects. So thank you very much again for staff's work in coming back with this budget, and let's accelerate on these areas that are in line with our OCP, because I think we need to look at that as our North Star and what we use to guide all of our decision making around this table. Again, 2030 is only 7 years away. Thanks.
We'll just say about that Lynn Valley, Lynn Creek, Metro Vancouver Parks has been looking at getting a new north-south route just slightly to the east of that location, and it may be an opportunity to partner on some of that as well through their Greenway project that they're doing in municipalities. So that Lynn Valley to Lynn Creek, there may be multiple ways to solve that ascending question, rather than through a more narrow major corridor, maybe a way to get a good option through there. Councillor Forbes.
Just a couple of points. I meant to thank staff. I understand you guys have capacity issues, and then it's resources even within our own district staff, and also getting contractors outside. So I appreciate that. So we have to keep that in mind, because I think, everybody kind of sloughs off capacity, but we're not unique. Like Rick said, all municipalities are suffering from capacity and being able to do things, as well as it's nice to get a windfall of money, because we're also trying to balance budgets this time of the year. The only other point I wanted to make was because of how the whole previous Sealand field was agreed to be given up by the soccer people, because they were going to get Inter-River. And now Sealand's already had phase 1 completed. I am not in favor of proceeding with phase 2 until Inter-River gets a playing field. Because they gave up, they sacrificed in order to have the phase 1 done. So I think that it's only fair that we make sure Inter-River gets done before we spend more money on Sealand. I realize it's a developing area, but this goes back several years, goes back to 2018, I think, when I sat in the council meeting, and it was all that debate between 2 fields, 1 field, whatever. So we've owed Inter-River since, 2018. So I think we need to do that. And the only other thing I'd like to say is there are many football players and people at Argyle that are going to graduate this year without ever being able to play on a field either. So I'm speaking up for Argyle too, I hope we stay on track and Argyle gets done, because that has been, the negotiations were complicated, to say the least. But there's a lot of the community that's pretty upset about Argyle just sitting there and it's tarped and water. So I just want to speak up and say I want to stay on track for Argyle to get done as soon as possible as well. And that's it. Thank you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. So this budget is ambitious, and it looks to us to deliver close to $100 million a year. We typically deliver about $60 to $70 million a year. We can do this as long as council is aligned and committed as a group allows us to move forward with these projects. We don't come back and discuss them and debate them. So we need a clear buy-in from this group that this is what you want, and give it to the staff that are here to go forward and deliver it. But if we're coming back, we won't be able to do this in the 5-year plan. So that's really important.
Okay, I support Plan B and the 5 1/4, just to let you know.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just following up on the issue of urgency, when I made my statement saying I support Plan B, 5.25% with the allocations that were in place, I don't want those words to be taken as that I don't also support urgent action on the most pressing active transportation routes, urgent action on Handsworth, urgent action on the Inter-River sites, subject, of course, to practicalities, capacity constraints and so forth. But I take the budget to be a fiscal framework. It leaves, like, with respect to active transportation, it provides $4.5 million to be allocated. Now, with respect to that allocation, obviously, I do support urgent allocation of that to the most pressing routes. So I guess in that respect, I hear a lot of agreement around the table. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd be with Mr. Joyce's last comments, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, there are lots of other projects that we, that are important in this community that we need to address. Ones that we haven't really even talked about in some of these, like, I would love the district to be participating in getting a washroom at Phibbs Exchange. And I know that that's going to have to be done in conjunction with TransLink and other partners to be able to do it. But it's incredibly important. There's 16,000 people per day that go through that facility with no support. Other municipalities actually do have better support from TransLink in terms of washrooms in those communities, and we don't. And I think we need to address that issue. So if you were looking for more issues to deal with, I think that's an important one. The challenge with going to $100 million potentially in projects that we need to complete, rather than us paring down the list of projects, is it means that staff will projects based on the deliverability of the project. And so if they can't complete all of it, then the ones that are more complex, more difficult to complete, then they will tend to be the ones that get punted out into future times so that they can complete the other ones. And so when the council puts lots and lots of things onto the table, knowing full well that not all of the projects can be completed, we're putting it in the very capable hands of our staff to some degree. I just want to be clear about that, to decide what falls off the table. If we're not willing to be the ones to decide what goes off the table. And I think that's kind of where we've set ourselves up for a very challenging year this year, to be able to deliver on projects in the environment that we're in, cost escalations that we're seeing. I mean, just as a, one that's just on the list there, $6.2 million was the original planned amount for the Inter-River project. And we now know that that's going to be north of, probably $10 million by the time the project is entirely completed. Obviously, we can then say, okay, well, we won't do the bathrooms now, or maybe the parking stays as a gravel surface for a time and we can work around it. But at the end of the day, if we aren't giving flexibility to our staff to address these issues, when you have cost overruns on projects, it's going to mean that that project is going to be vulnerable. And so I'm glad that staff have not spent the entire 10.2. I'm glad that you have retained some in there. I think that we still are very thin on contingency to be able to respond to changes in budgets and tendering as we go through this year. So I'm a little worried about that because some have come up with some pretty scary increases in particular fields. The long and short of it is, I think you've responded well to the concerns we heard from the public, and I will be supportive of the Plan B option. As much as I'm a little nervous about the financial exposure on it, and the deliverability of some of the projects, I do think I have to acknowledge that it recognizes what we've heard in the community and what we've also shared amongst ourselves as council, as a council. So I'll be supportive of Plan B. Now, what we're specifically looking for tonight is not a motion, but I think you have confidence to know that you can go and prepare the bylaws for the 27th in line with Plan B, is what I've heard around the table. I know that Councillor Murray will want to add some comments when she returns and the matter comes back to council. What it would look like is that would be in a regular public meeting. And so we will have our standard 4 minutes and 2 minutes to be able to also comment on it at that time, even though I know it'll be repeat for a lot of the things people have said around the table here tonight. But that's when we formally will go through first, second, and third on this particular item. I haven't seen any additional hands at this point. Councillor Pope, yeah.
I just wanted to pick up a couple of things. I like the washrooms at Phibbs Exchanges. Is like, it just has to be done somehow, right? So I appreciate you thinking of that. And but I have wondered, like, why is it TransLink why are they not funding that?
They have had a resistance to funding washrooms throughout their system. It's twofold. They don't want to operate it is the main issue. But also retrofitting a lot of their spaces to have that infrastructure in place is a challenge. My frustration is that they haven't been anticipating that change, that we expect them in all new facilities to have the infrastructure built to upgrade them. But you have places like the Broadway SkyTrain station, have 200,000 people a day go through that facility and they don't have washrooms.
Really?
And so, but other areas like the C-Bus station has washrooms on both sides. And so it really depends on the philosophy of TransLink at the time your facility was built. But I am seeing more and more push around the TransLink table to get these spaces built and serviced. The challenge with the bus loops is it's not a fair paid area. So you have to be able to manage broader community needs as well in that space. And TransLink has to really operate under a public expectation of access to it. If you had put it in restaurants as a contract or something, then the manager of that restaurant could, manage the access to the facility to some degree. So there's different models for how you can actually give public access to it. But I completely agree. I think that it's critically important to that piece of infrastructure. People are waiting far too long in that space to not have washroom services close by. And unlike some other areas, where you may have an A&W, like immediately on the property, ours is, a little further away, or some other kind of service there. At many hours of the day, there's no washroom within easy walking distance of the Phibbs Exchange facility, and it's inadequate.
We can talk about that some more sometime. It really needs to
So what
be
we'll-
addressed.
But what we've got is in the current plan, the provincial government through their project has actually put the infrastructure in the ground to support a proper public washroom at that location. So that piece has been addressed. Now we got to get the building built and then we got to get a contract to actually maintain and service it.
The discussion
But-
continues.
Yeah, that's an important deliverable.
Couple of other points I just wanted to make in closing, I'll be brief, is the fact that yes, we're projecting, we're asking for a lot. And thank you so much to staff for trying to make it all work. It is an increase. I'm interested to hear that it's from an average of 60 million to 100 million in projects. I also just want to say that I think part of the problem is that we haven't moved forward with so many of these projects in the past for various reasons. And that's why we're in the situation we're in now, that we're really playing catch up with some of these community amenities that this community needs, deserves, has been promised for years, and all of that. So that's why we're in this situation. Additionally, I would like to say that, yes, the cost may be a little bit more than what people are used to in their property tax, but the cost of deferring these projects is also very, very significant. And the longer we leave them on the back burner and the community starts screaming, it's going to cost even more. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Beck?
I just wanted to say that I heard Gavin's point, and I wanted to say, council does need to empower staff. We believe that this is the list of projects that we want to go forward with. And I mentioned the OCP a lot tonight because I think that should be what we all get behind all of the time. But we need to see these things through and not change our mind, or sure, things can change along the way, but I think staff are looking for clear direction in terms of what this council is going to get behind and consistently support over the next 5 years. So I just wanted to let it be known that I heard that staff are looking for clear direction.
Any further speakers at this time? Mr. Stewart, can I call on you to feel you have adequate direction from the council to recognize that you can prepare the bylaws for the Plan B option?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, council, we have a 7 o'clock meeting for the regular meeting of council coming up. This gives us a little bit of a time for people to have a bit of a leg stretch. So that clock disappears when it's a white background. I've been looking to that corner clock. There you go. There it is. Having completed the business of the workshop, I'll accept adjournment. Thank you. Council Forbes accepted, and have a leg stretch, grab a drink, and then we'll see you back at 7 o'clock in the main chamber. Thank you, Rick and Peter. You guys got off.
How are you?